My 6-year-old returned, clinging close, and whispered they dined indoors while I waited outside in 5 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours. I posed not one inquiry. I seized my keys, sped to my in-laws' residence, stepped inside, and my subsequent actions altered everything. Can you imagine the kind of betrayal that makes your own child whisper 8 words that shatter your entire world? My son's lips were blue, his body shaking, his little hands ice cold. But it wasn't just the frostbite that truly shattered me. It was what he said, revealing a betrayal so deep, it exposed a hidden conspiracy reaching into my own family, and a secret I'd kept for years. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd stay silent. They thought wrong. This is the story of how I went from being the family doormat to the woman who destroyed everyone who underestimated me, legally, financially, and permanently. And trust me, by the time I was done, they wished they'd never laid eyes on my son. Stay with me. You won't believe where this goes. My name is Grace Thompson. I'm 35 years old. For 7 years, I told my family I worked in office administration, a vague description that suited me just fine. I married Marcus at 28, had our son, Liam, at 30. For years, I tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect daughter and sister. I didn't realize until much later that perfect, in my family's vocabulary, actually meant silent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in February, one of those brutally cold days where the air itself feels sharp enough to cut skin. I'd stayed late at the office, finishing up a case review. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was nearly 7 o'clock. The house was dark except for the porch light, which struck me as odd. Marcus had taken Liam to dinner with his parents and sister at some new Italian place they were all excited about. They should have been home by now. Should have been making noise, filling the space with the warm chaos of a family evening. Instead, I walked into silence. And then I saw him. Liam was sitting on the bottom step of our staircase, still in his winter coat. But something was wrong. He sat too still, too small, curled into himself like he was trying to disappear. When he heard me come in, his head lifted, and my heart stopped. His face was pale, almost gray in the dim light. His lips had a bluish tinge that made my nurse mother instincts scream in alarm, even though I'd never worked a day in healthcare. But it was his eyes that broke me. My son's bright, trusting eyes were filled with something I'd never seen there before, a deep, hollow fear that no 5-year-old should ever know. Liam. My purse hit the floor. I was across the room in seconds, dropping to my knees in front of him. The moment my hands touched his shoulders, I gasped. Even through his coat, his body was ice cold. Not cool. Not chilly. Ice cold, like he'd been stored in a freezer. He started shaking the instant I touched him, violent tremors that rattled his small frame. Then he lunged forward, wrapping his arms around my neck with a desperate strength that nearly knocked me backward. His face buried into my shoulder, and I felt wetness there. Tears, but also the moisture of melting frost from his hair. Baby, what happened? Where's Daddy? Where's? They ate at a restaurant, he whispered against my neck, his voice so small I almost didn't hear it. While I waited outside, my hands, which had been rubbing his back trying to warm him, went still. What did you say? He pulled back just enough to look at me, and I saw it then. Not just fear, but betrayal. The kind of betrayal that comes from being abandoned by the people who are supposed to protect you. I waited outside, Mommy, for a long time. It was so cold. His lips trembled, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. I knocked on the window. I saw them eating, but they didn't let me in. The words hit me like physical blows. Each one landed somewhere in my chest, in my stomach, in that primal part of every mother's brain that exists solely to protect her child. I felt something shift inside me, like tectonic plates grinding against each other before an earthquake. How long, baby? How long were you outside? I don't know. His teeth were chattering now. A really, really long time. My fingers hurt. My toes hurt. I kept knocking, but nobody came. I pulled him closer, trying to process what he was telling me. Marcus's family took my son to a restaurant in 5-degree weather and left him outside while they ate. Not for a few minutes. Not by accident. Long enough for hypothermia to set in. Long enough to turn his lips blue. Long enough to put that look of absolute abandonment in his eyes. "Where's Daddy now?" I asked, my voice eerily calm, even as rage began to build behind my ribs like a living thing. "He took me home and left. He said I should take a bath and go to bed. He said I was fine." Liam's voice cracked. "But I'm not fine, Mommy. I'm so cold. I can't get warm." That's when it happened. The exact moment something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like a rope pulled too tight for too long, finally giving way with a sound that echoes in the silence afterward. I stood up, Liam still in my arms, and carried him to the car. I didn't grab a bag. I didn't call anyone. I just moved with a clarity of purpose I'd never experienced before. My son needed a hospital. He needed doctors. He needed someone to document what had been done to him. Because deep in my bones, I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was something darker, something calculated, something that would require more than an apology to fix. The emergency room was bright and busy. But the moment the triage nurse saw Liam's blue lips and felt his icy skin, we were fast-tracked to a room. A young doctor, barely older than me, examined him with increasingly concerned eyes. She ordered warm blankets, warm for fluids, continuous monitoring. She asked questions in a gentle voice while taking notes with a grim expression. "How long was he exposed to the cold?" "Approximately 2 hours," I said, my voice mechanical. "He was left outside a restaurant while adults ate inside." The doctor's pen stopped moving. Her eyes met mine. Left outside intentionally? That's what I'm trying to understand. She examined Liam more thoroughly, checking his fingers and toes for frostbite, listening to his heart, taking his temperature. When she finally turned to me, her expression was serious in a way that made my stomach clench. "Mrs. Thompson, your son's core body temperature is currently 94.2 degrees. Normal is 98.6. He's in the early stages of hypothermia." She paused, and I saw her choose her next words carefully. If he'd been out there 20 more minutes, maybe 30, we'd be having a very different conversation. This level of cold exposure is life-threatening for a child his size. 20 minutes. My son was 20 minutes away from dying while his father and grandparents ate pasta and breadsticks. "I need this documented," I heard myself say. Everything. His temperature, the timeline, all of it. This wasn't an accident. The doctor studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make sure the report is thorough. And Mrs. Thompson, I'm mandated to report suspected child endangerment. I need you to understand that I'll be contacting Child Protective Services." "Good," I said. And I meant it. They should know. While Liam slept under heated blankets, warmed by 4 fluids and the safe cocoon of a hospital room, I sat in a plastic chair, holding the medical report the doctor had printed for me. The words swam before my eyes: hypothermia, exposure, endangerment, life-threatening. My phone buzzed with texts from Marcus, asking where we were, saying I was overreacting, insisting Liam was fine. I didn't answer. I just stared at my sleeping son, at the monitor tracking his slowly rising body temperature, at the evidence of what they'd done. And I whispered to myself, to the universe, to whatever forces govern justice in this world, they will pay for every second he suffered. I didn't know it yet, but that whispered promise would become my mission, my purpose. The thing that would transform me from the silent, accommodating Grace everyone thought they knew into someone entirely different. Someone who would stop at nothing to protect her child. Someone they should have been very, very afraid of crossing. Sitting in that hospital room, watching Liam sleep, I had too much time to think. Too much time to wonder how I'd ended up here, married to a man who could abandon our son in freezing weather, surrounded by families who treated me like a resource rather than a person. The answer, I realized with uncomfortable clarity, was that I'd been training for this role my entire life. I grew up as Grace Torres, eldest daughter of Maria and Robert Torres. From the moment my sister Jessica was born when I was 3 years old, I learned exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Jessica was the miracle baby, the the one my mother had almost lost during a difficult pregnancy. She arrived in the world with drama and crisis, and she never stopped being the center of attention afterward. I don't remember my parents ever explaining that Jessica was special and I was not. They didn't have to. It was written in every interaction, every decision, every family moment. When Jessica wanted dance lessons, we found the money. When I asked for art classes, I was told we needed to be practical. When Jessica struggled with math, my parents hired a tutor. When I struggled with science, I was told to work harder. The pattern was so consistent, so thoroughly woven into the fabric of our family, that I stopped seeing it as unfair. I just accepted it as the natural order of things. My mother had a phrase she used constantly, family first. But the way she wielded those words revealed their true meaning. Family first meant Grace puts everyone else ahead of herself. Family first meant Grace gives up her college savings so Jessica can go to the better school. Family first meant Grace works 2 jobs during high school while Jessica focuses on her social life. The phrase was never directed at Jessica. She was family. I was the one who served family. I learned to be invisible in the ways that mattered. My achievements were acknowledged with a brief nod before conversation moved back to Jessica's latest adventure. My struggles were dismissed as character-building challenges I needed to overcome alone. When I graduated high school with honors, my mother spent the entire dinner talking about Jessica's upcoming prom dress. When I got accepted to college, my father's only comment was asking if I'd applied for enough scholarships because they couldn't help financially. They could help Jessica, of course. They always could help Jessica. The worst part wasn't the inequality itself. It was how thoroughly I internalized it. By the time I was 16, I genuinely believed that my role in the family was to be useful, helpful, and undemanding. I believed that love was something you earned through service. And if you weren't receiving it, you simply weren't serving well enough. This belief system shaped everything about me, how I related to others, what I thought I deserved, how much mistreatment I was willing to accept as normal. Looking back now, I can see how my mother weaponized guilt with surgical precision. Any attempt I made to set boundaries was reframed as selfishness. When I said I couldn't babysit Jessica because I had exams, I was self-centered and letting the family down. When I expressed frustration about paying for groceries while Jessica got spending money, I was creating division and being materialistic. My father never intervened, never defended me, never acknowledged the imbalance. His silence was its own form of abandonment. Jessica, for her part, never questioned her position. Why would she? From her perspective, the family functioned perfectly. She received unconditional love and support while contributing nothing in return. She learned that her needs were paramount, that others existed to serve her. That responsibility was something other people dealt with. She grew into a beautiful, charming woman who genuinely believed the world owed her everything she wanted. And I grew into someone who believed she owed the world everything it asked for. This dynamic made me vulnerable in ways I didn't understand until much later. When I met Marcus and his family, their treatment of me felt familiar, comfortable even. They made demands. I met them. They criticized. I apologized. They took. I gave. It was the only model of family I knew. I didn't recognize it as abuse because it looked exactly like love had always looked in my life, conditional, transactional, and entirely dependent on my usefulness. The irony is that I recently discovered my birth family has been drowning in financial problems for over a year. Jessica's boutique, the one my parents helped finance with money they claimed not to have when I needed it, has been failing. My father made some poor investments that depleted their retirement savings. My mother's part-time work barely covers their mounting credit card debt. They hid all of this from me while continuing to make snide comments about my career obsession and my need to prove something by being so independent. Their pride wouldn't allow them to admit they needed help, but their entitlement still expected me to somehow intuit their problems and solve them. I was supposed to be their safety net without being asked, their salvation without being told. And the infuriating thing is that a year ago, I probably would have been. I would have sensed their distress, offered my savings, and felt grateful they accepted my help. But something had shifted in me over the past months, even before Liam's incident. Small moments of clarity that accumulated into larger realizations. I saw how they never asked about my life, my work, my challenges. I noticed how they assumed I'd always be available, always say yes, always sacrifice. I recognized that I wasn't actually a member of this family. I was a resource they expected to exploit indefinitely. My phone buzzed on the hospital room table, the sound sharp in the quiet. I picked it up and saw a text from my mother. "No, how are you? No, how's Liam? Just, we need to talk. Jessica is here. It's urgent." I stared at those words, and something cold settled in my chest. It wasn't quite anger yet. It was something harder, more permanent. A door closing somewhere deep inside me. They had no idea what I was dealing with right now. No idea their grandson was in a hospital bed, recovering from hypothermia. And they wanted to talk because something was urgent for them. For Jessica. I set the phone down without responding and turned back to Liam, watching his small chest rise and fall under the heated blankets. For the first time in my life, their urgency wasn't my emergency. The hospital released Liam the next morning with instructions to keep him warm, watch for delayed symptoms, and follow up with his pediatrician. I took him to my apartment, not the house I shared with Marcus, but a small one-bedroom place I'd quietly rented 3 months earlier. Marcus didn't know about it. Neither did my family. It was my secret. My escape hatch. The place I went when I needed to think clearly, without the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me. As Liam napped in the bedroom, I sat at my small kitchen table and did something I should have done years ago. I pulled my credit report. The numbers that appeared on my screen made my stomach drop. My credit score, which had been excellent when I last checked it 2 years ago, had plummeted to 580. There were 5 credit cards listed under my name, 3 of which I'd never opened. The balances were staggering. $8,400 on one, $11,000 on another, $6,200 on a third. Over $26,000 in debt I didn't know existed, attached to my name like barnacles on a ship's hull, dragging me down into waters I couldn't navigate. I should have been surprised. I should have been shocked. But sitting there, staring at those numbers, I realized some part of me had known for a long time that something was wrong with my marriage. I'd just been too well trained in denial to acknowledge it. Marcus Thompson was 37 years old, 2 years older than me, and he'd perfected the art of looking responsible without actually being responsible. When we first met, I was charmed by his confidence, the way he talked about building a future together, about being a provider, about taking care of his family. It took me years to realize that his words were a beautiful facade covering an empty structure. I paid the mortgage. Every single month, the payment came from my account. I paid for childcare, for groceries, for utilities, for car insurance, for Liam's clothes and toys and doctor visits. Marcus contributed sporadically, unpredictably, always with an air of magnanimous generosity that made it seem like he was doing me a favor. $200 here, $300 there, always accompanied by a comment about how expensive everything was, how hard he was working, how much pressure he was under. But I was the one working 50-hour weeks. I was the one who hadn't bought new clothes for myself in 2 years. I was the one who packed lunches and clipped coupons and quietly absorbed every financial burden, while Marcus maintained his gym membership, his weekend golf games, his expensive craft beer habit, and his wardrobe of designer jeans. He positioned himself as the stable, dependable husband. At family gatherings, he'd talk about providing for his family and making sure Grace and Liam had everything they needed. People believed him because he spoke with such conviction, such authority. And I said nothing, because I'd learned long ago that contradicting the narrative made you the problem, not the liar telling the story. I didn't recognize it as financial abuse because abuse, in my understanding, meant yelling and hitting and obvious violence. I didn't realize that slowly draining someone's resources while making them feel guilty for noticing was its own form of violence. Marcus never asked if he could use my money. He simply assumed it was his right. My paycheck was our money, but his paycheck was his business. The credit cards, though. The secret credit cards opened in my name. That was a different level entirely. I pulled up the details on each fraudulent account. The first one had been opened 18 months ago. The charges were for things Marcus wanted, but we couldn't afford: a new laptop, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, purchases from sporting goods stores and electronics retailers. The second card, opened a year ago, showed hotel charges in cities where Marcus claimed to be on business trips. The third card was newer, only 6 months old, but already maxed out with charges I couldn't even fully decipher. Each statement was a revelation, a puzzle piece clicking into place: the business trips that seemed excessive, the new clothes that appeared in his closet, the casual mentions of lunches with colleagues at places far beyond our budget. He'd been funding a lifestyle we couldn't afford with money stolen from my identity, my credit, my future. The implications made me feel physically ill. Marcus hadn't just betrayed my trust. He'd committed identity theft. He'd forged my signature on credit applications. He'd systematically destroyed my financial stability while I worked myself to exhaustion, trying to keep our family afloat. And he'd done it all while positioning himself as the responsible partner, the good husband, the family man. My phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Grace Thompson?" A man's voice, professional but firm. "Yes, this is." "This is Stephen Park calling from Allied Collections Agency. I'm calling regarding an outstanding balance of $12,437 on your Capital Reserve credit card. Our records show this account is 90 days past due." My hand tightened on the phone. "I don't have a Capital Reserve credit card." "Ma'am, the account was opened in your name on March 15th of last year. We've sent multiple notices to your address. The balance has now been referred to collections, and we need to arrange payment immediately to avoid legal action." $12,000. Another card I didn't know about. Another piece of my financial life that Marcus had commandeered without permission, without discussion, without conscience. "I need you to send me all documentation related to this account," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, including the application with signature. "I believe I'm a victim of identity theft." There was a pause. "Ma'am, if you're claiming fraud, you'll need to file a police report and—" "I understand the process. Send me everything." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my small apartment, listening to Liam's soft breathing from the other room. My son, who'd been abandoned in freezing weather. My marriage, built on lies and theft. My family, who saw me as an ATM with emotions they could manipulate. The pieces were all there. I just hadn't been willing to see the picture they created. I heard the apartment door open. Marcus had a key. I'd given it to him last week when I could no longer hide this place from him. His footsteps crossed the living room, and then he was standing in the kitchen doorway, looking at me with casual expectation. "There you are," he said, as if he hadn't abandoned our son to near-fatal hypothermia less than 24 hours ago. "I've been calling you all day. What's for dinner?" I looked at Marcus standing in my kitchen doorway, asking about dinner as if the world hadn't just cracked open, and I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. "We need to talk about what happened that night," I said quietly. "What really happened?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Grace, I told you Liam was fine. You overreacted by taking him to the hospital. Kids are tougher than—" "Sit down, Marcus." Maybe it was something in my voice. Or maybe he sensed that the woman he'd married, the one who absorbed blame and swallowed anger, wasn't the woman sitting across from him anymore. He sat. I took myself back to that night, to the moment I'd bundled Liam into the car to rush him to the emergency room. Before I'd even started the engine, something made me check the back seat. Call it maternal instinct, or legal training, or just the acute awareness that something about this entire situation felt orchestrated rather than accidental. And there, stuffed underneath the passenger seat, deliberately wedged into the small space where it couldn't be easily seen, was Liam's winter coat. Not forgotten on a hook. Not left behind in a moment of chaos. Hidden. I'd pulled it out slowly, my hands shaking as I examined it. This was his heavy coat, the one with the thick insulation and the hood lined with fleece, the one I'd specifically dressed him in that morning because the temperature was supposed to drop below 0. Someone had removed it from his body and deliberately concealed it under the seat. The premeditation of that action stole my breath. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone forgetting in the confusion of getting out of a car. This was calculated. Someone had stripped my 5-year-old son of his protection against freezing temperatures and hidden the evidence of their action. I'd taken photographs of it with my phone, multiple angles, showing exactly where it was wedged under the seat. Some part of my brain was already cataloging evidence, already building a case, already understanding that I would need proof of what had been done. The lawyer in me was waking up, even though Marcus and both our families believed I spent my days filing papers and answering phones. "You found his coat," Marcus said, now his voice flat. "I found where someone hid his coat," I corrected. "There's a difference." During that drive to the emergency room, with Liam wrapped in my cardigan and the car's heat blasting, he'd finally started talking. His voice was small and halting, like he was confessing something shameful rather than describing something done to him. "Mommy, I knocked on the window," he'd said. "I knocked a lot." My hands had tightened on the steering wheel. "What happened when you knocked, baby?" "The grandma saw me." She looked right at me. His voice cracked. But then she turned around. "And Grandpa and Aunt Rachel, they saw me too. They all saw me, but they just kept eating." I'd had to pull over, my vision blurring with tears I couldn't let fall because I needed to be strong for him. Needed to get him to safety. The image he'd painted was so much worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't forgetting. This was active, deliberate abandonment. They had looked at my freezing child, knocking desperately on glass, and made a choice to ignore him. "Where was Daddy?" I'd asked, though I already knew the answer would destroy something fundamental in our marriage. "Inside. With them. Eating." Marcus sat across from me now in my apartment kitchen, and I watched his face as I recounted what his son had told me. I watched for shame, for horror, for some indication that he understood the gravity of what he'd allowed to happen. Instead, I saw defensiveness settling over his features like a mask. "My mother said Liam was being difficult," he started. "He wouldn't sit still. He was bothering other diners, and he's 5 years old, Marcus." 5. My voice was a low growl. "And your response to a child being restless was to lock him outside in life-threatening cold, to remove his coat and hide it, to ignore him when he knocked on the window, begging to be let back in? That's not. You're making it sound worse than it was. The doctor said he was 20 minutes from dying. How much worse does it need to be?" That night in the hospital, after Liam had finally fallen asleep under heated blankets, after the nurses had checked his warming vitals for the 3rd time, I'd sat in the chair beside his bed and felt something fundamental shift inside me. It was like watching tectonic plates move in my own chest, the ground of who I was literally reshaping itself. I thought about all the times I'd accepted mistreatment as normal. All the times I'd made excuses for people who hurt me. All the years I'd spent believing that endurance was a virtue and that setting boundaries was selfishness. I thought about my mother telling me family first, while my sister took and took and took. I thought about Marcus spending my money while I worked myself to exhaustion. I thought about his family looking at my suffering child and choosing their dinner. And I realized I'd spent 35 years confusing love with service, confusing family with obligation, confusing peace with surrender. But there was a line. Everyone has one, even if they don't know it exists until it's crossed. Mine wasn't about me. I'd proven I could absorb endless amounts of pain directed at myself. My line was my son. The moment they endangered Liam, the moment they looked at his desperate face pressed against that window and turned away, they didn't just cross my boundary. They obliterated it. The woman who'd driven Liam home from that hospital wasn't the woman who dropped him off at that restaurant. Something had crystallized in me, hard and unbreakable. I didn't recognize her completely, this person I was becoming, but I trusted her with a certainty I'd never trusted the old Grace. I'd left Liam with the night nurse for 20 minutes, gotten back in my car, and driven straight to Marcus's parents' house. I didn't call first. I didn't ask permission. I walked up to their door and turned the handle. It was unlocked, as it always was, and I simply walked in. The Thompson family home was always warm, almost oppressively so. Marcus's mother kept the thermostat at 75 degrees year-round, claiming her thin blood couldn't handle anything cooler. As I stepped through their front door that night, the the wall of heat hit me like a physical force, and the contrast between this excessive warmth and the freezing cold they'd left my son and made something twist violently in my chest. I heard them before I saw them. Laughter, the kind that comes easy and thoughtless, floating from the living room. The television was on, playing some game show, but the real entertainment was clearly their own conversation. I stood in the entryway for a moment, my coat still on, listening to them enjoy themselves. Then I walked into the living room, and the scene that greeted me nearly stopped my heart. They were arranged on the sectional sofa like some twisted Norman Rockwell painting. Marcus's mother, Patricia, sat in her usual corner spot, reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through her phone. His father, Donald, was in his recliner with a glass of wine, looking pleased with himself in that particular way he had after a good meal. Marcus's sister, Rachel, lounged across the love seat, her own phone in hand, occasionally showing her screen to their mother and giggling. Not one of them looked troubled. Not one showed any sign that just hours ago they'd nearly killed a child. Oh. Patricia looked up as I entered, startled, but not displeased. "Grace, dear, we didn't hear you come in. Marcus said you'd taken Liam home. Is he feeling better? He seemed a bit under the weather at dinner." "Under the weather?" As if hypothermia was equivalent to a mild cold. "He's in the hospital," I said, my voice level. "He has hypothermia. The doctor said 20 more minutes of exposure, and we'd be having a very different conversation right now." There was a beat of silence. Patricia's smile faltered slightly, but then she recovered, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, you know how doctors are these days. They have to be so cautious about everything. I'm sure he's just fine." Children bounce back from anything. Rachel didn't even look up from her phone. Donald took another sip of his wine. The cognitive dissonance was so extreme, I almost couldn't process it. They'd endangered my son's life, and they were sitting here with their expensive wine and their comfortable home, completely unconcerned. They'd compartmentalized what they'd done with such efficiency that it didn't even register as something requiring their attention. "What are you looking at?" I asked, though I could already see the blue glow of Facebook reflected on both women's faces. "Just posting some pictures from dinner," Patricia said brightly. "We had such a lovely time at Marcello's. The service was excellent, and the veal was to die for. Here, look." She held out her phone to me, and I made myself look. There they were, all four of them, Patricia, Donald, Marcus, and Rachel, gathered around a table laden with pasta and wine and breadsticks. Everyone was smiling. Marcus had his arm around Rachel's shoulders. Patricia was holding up her wine glass in a toast. The lighting was warm and flattering, the kind of photo designed to project happiness and family unity to the world. And barely visible at the edge of the frame was an empty chair. I took the phone from Patricia's hand, zooming in on that chair. It had a booster seat on it. Liam's booster seat, the one we kept in Marcus's car for family outings. A plate sitting in front of it and used. A water glass empty. The chair itself positioned at the table as if someone was meant to sit there, but deliberately kept empty. They'd set a place for him. They'd brought his booster seat in. And then they'd removed him from the picture, literally and figuratively. "Can I see the other photos?" I asked, my voice eerily calm, even to my own ears. Patricia beamed, apparently thrilled by my interest. She swiped through several images. In every single one, that chair sat empty. In some photos, they'd turned it to face away from the table, as if even its emptiness was an unwanted reminder of the child they'd excluded. In others, Rachel had hung her purse on its back, using Liam's seat as furniture. My lawyer's brain was already cataloging this evidence. These photos proved premeditation. They'd planned a family dinner for 5 people, but only allowed 4 to participate. They'd documented their cruelty in high resolution and posted it publicly, never imagining anyone would see it as the evidence of deliberate exclusion that it was. "Liam told me something interesting," I said, handing the phone back to Patricia. "He said he knocked on the window multiple times and that all of you saw him." The room's energy shifted immediately. Rachel finally looked up from her phone, her expression guarded. Donald set down his wine glass. Patricia's smile became fixed, artificial. "Well, I don't know what he thinks he saw," Patricia said carefully. It was quite dark outside and the restaurant lighting creates glare on the windows. I'm sure if we'd realized you looked right at him, I interrupted. He described it very specifically. He said you saw him, looked at him for several seconds, and then turned back to your meal. That's not, children have such active imaginations at that age, Donald interjected. Where is his coat? I asked, cutting through his excuse. My voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but it silenced them all. Rachel and Patricia exchanged a glance. Donald studied his wine glass intently. His coat. Patricia repeated, as if confused by the question. His winter coat, the one I dressed him in this morning because it was 5 degrees outside. Where is it? I'm sure he just forgot it, Rachel offered, her tone dismissive. Kids that age are always leaving things behind. He didn't forget it, I said. It was removed from his body and hidden under the car seat. Someone took it off him deliberately. Well, he must have taken it off himself, Patricia said quickly. You know how children are. They get too warm and it wasn't that cold. The boy was being dramatic. He needed to learn responsibility, Donald interrupted, contradicting his wife's excuse before she'd even finished it. He was misbehaving, bothering other customers. We were teaching him that actions have consequences, Rachel added. 3 different excuses. 3 completely contradictory explanations. None of them coordinated their lies ahead of time, and now their stories collapsed under the weight of their own inconsistency. They weren't even trying to make it believable. The lack of effort was its own kind of contempt. They didn't respect me enough to create a plausible story. I looked at each of them in turn, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in the 7 years I'd been part of this family. They weren't good people caught in a moment of poor judgment. They were fundamentally cruel people who'd always been this way, and I'd simply been too conditioned to mistreatment to recognize it. I took a step closer to Patricia, my voice dropping even lower. Where is his coat? Rachel laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that made my skin crawl. The kind of laugh that has no humor in it, only contempt. Oh my God, Grace, you're being so dramatic about this, she said, setting her phone down on the couch beside her. Kids need to toughen up. Honestly, we did Liam a favor tonight by not coddling him. He can't grow up thinking the world is going to baby him every time he's a little uncomfortable. A little uncomfortable? My son had been 20 minutes from dying, and she was calling it a little uncomfortable. I felt my phone in my coat pocket, and without thinking too hard about it, I reached in and tapped the voice recording app. I'd learned this trick in law school, back when I was still naive enough to believe I'd only use such skills for justice, not survival. The phone stayed in my pocket, but I knew it was capturing every word in this room. You think leaving a 5-year-old outside in 5-degree weather is doing him a favor? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Let them talk. Let them explain themselves. It's called teaching resilience, Rachel continued, warming to her subject now. She sat up straighter, like a professor about to deliver a lecture. This generation of kids is being raised so soft. Everything is participation trophies and safe spaces and constant validation. That's not how the real world works. We were doing what you and Marcus should have been doing all along, teaching him that life is hard and he needs to handle it. Patricia nodded along, her expression one of complete agreement. Rachel's absolutely right, dear. My generation, we were expected to be tough. My father used to make me and my brothers play outside for hours in the winter. It built character. Liam needs that same kind of character building. He's 5 years old, I said quietly. Old enough to learn. Donald interjected. He'd been mostly silent until now, but apparently felt the need to add his authority to the conversation. The boy is too sensitive, Grace. Always has been. He cries too easily, gets upset over nothing. That's what happens when you coddle children. We were simply correcting a parenting mistake. The arrogance was breathtaking. They genuinely believed they were in the right. They'd constructed an entire justification system in their minds, where nearly killing a child was equivalent to building character. The warped logic was so complete, so hermetically sealed, that nothing I said would penetrate it. So, you're saying you deliberately left him outside? I asked, wanting absolute clarity on the record. We disciplined him, Patricia said firmly. We have every right to discipline our grandson however the family sees fit. He's part of this family, and family discipline is our business, not the business of hospitals or doctors or anyone else. We know what's best for him. You think you have the right to endanger his life? We didn't endanger anything, Donald said, his voice taking on an edge of irritation. You're catastrophizing, Grace. You always do this. Take a perfectly reasonable situation and blow it completely out of proportion. The boy was outside for a little while. He survived. He's fine. End of story. Exactly, Rachel chimed in. And frankly, if you were a better mother, you'd be thanking us for teaching him what you apparently can't. But instead, you're in here interrogating us like we committed some kind of crime. They weren't just confessing. They were proud of what they'd done. They were framing it as a service to Liam and a necessary intervention in my inadequate parenting. The entitlement was so profound that they couldn't even see the criminal nature of their actions. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Not the one that was recording, but my personal phone in my other pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Thompson, this is Robert Chin, manager at Marcello's. I was working tonight when your family was here. I need to talk to you about what I witnessed. Is there a number I can call you at? My heart began to pound. I typed back quickly. This number is fine. What did you see? The response came almost immediately. I have security footage from tonight. I think you need to see it. What happened to that little boy wasn't right. Can I send it to you? I looked up at Marcus's family, still sitting there in their righteous indignation, completely unaware that their entire justification was about to be undermined by objective evidence. Yes, please send it, I typed. You know what your problem is, Grace? Patricia was saying. You've never understood how this family works. We have standards, expectations, ways of doing things. You can't just waltz in here 7 years later and question our methods. We raised 3 children, and they all turned out perfectly fine. My phone buzzed again. Sending now. I'm sorry you're going through this. That child was clearly in distress, and they ignored him. I almost called police myself. The video file loaded on my phone. It was time-stamped from earlier that evening, the camera angle showing the front entrance and windows of Marcello's restaurant. I pressed play. The footage was clear, shot in high definition by a modern security system. I watched as Marcus's family entered the restaurant at 6:47 p.m. Liam was with them, wearing his winter coat, holding Marcus's hand. They went inside, got a table visible through the large front windows. At 6:50 p.m., Rachel stood up from the table. She walked over to Liam, said something to him, and then took his hand. She led him to the front door. I watched my son's small figure being guided outside. And then I had to rewind it to make sure I was seeing correctly. Rachel literally pushed him out the door and quickly closed it behind him. She didn't hand him his coat. She didn't leave the door propped open. She pushed him out and shut the door firmly. At 6:54 p.m., Liam appeared at the window, his face pressed against the glass. He was knocking. From the angle, I could see into the restaurant where Marcus's family sat at their table, visible through that same window. Patricia looked up, made direct eye contact with Liam, then deliberately turned her body away and said something to Donald that made him laugh. At 7:03 p.m., Liam was still knocking. Marcus glanced at the window, saw him, and returned to his pasta. At 7:15 p.m., Liam had stopped knocking. He was sitting on the ground outside the door, curled into himself. The video ran for another 43 minutes before Marcus finally stood up, walked to the door, and let Liam back in. By then, my son was barely moving. I saved the video to 3 different locations on my phone, then uploaded it to my secure cloud storage. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. With something else entirely, something cold and purposeful and utterly certain. Grace, Patricia was looking at me strangely. Are you even listening? I looked up from my phone, meeting her eyes directly. Every word I said quietly. Then I pulled up my lawyer's contact information and sent a text. Call me now. I put my phone back in my pocket and looked at Patricia. She was still waiting for an answer to her questions, still expecting me to engage in the argument she was trying to start. I could see in her face that she was prepared for tears, for shouting, for the kind of emotional response that would let her dismiss me as hysterical and unreasonable. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small upward curve of my lips, the kind of expression that doesn't quite reach the eyes. And I said nothing. The silence stretched between us like a physical thing. 10 seconds. 20. Patricia's confident expression began to falter. Rachel shifted uncomfortably on the love seat. Donald cleared his throat, the sound too loud in the quiet room. Grace. Patricia tried again, her voice taking on a nervous edge. Are you all right, dear? I let the question hang there unanswered. I'd spent 7 years in this family, responding immediately to every query, every demand, every implied expectation. 7 years of jumping to explain myself, to apologize, to smooth things over. They'd come to expect that version of me the way you expect the sun to rise. Automatic, reliable, unchanging. But that woman wasn't standing in their living room anymore. I could see the exact moment Patricia realized something had shifted. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying me with new attention. She was trying to figure out what had changed, what was different about me. But she couldn't quite identify it. The power dynamic in the room had inverted so subtly that she couldn't point to any single moment when it happened. She just knew, with the instinct of someone who'd controlled every interaction for decades, that she was no longer in control of this one. I'm just trying to understand, I said finally, my voice calm and even. Walk me through it again. Liam was misbehaving at the restaurant. Rachel jumped on this, apparently relieved to return to familiar territory where she could justify their actions. He was being impossible, whining about being hungry even though we literally just ordered, climbing on the chairs, bothering the table next to us. It was embarrassing. So, you decided the appropriate response was to send him outside? We decided he needed a timeout, Patricia corrected. A consequence for his behavior. That's basic parenting, Grace. And the coat? I asked. Why remove his coat for a timeout? There was a pause. I watched them exchange glances, trying to coordinate without speaking. He was fine with just his sweater, Donald said. It wasn't as cold as you're making it sound. But you said earlier it wasn't that cold, period. Now you're saying his sweater was enough. Which is it? Another pause. Patricia's mouth opened and closed. Rachel looked at her phone. The point is, Patricia said, her voice taking on that particular sharp edge she used when she wanted to end a conversation. We made a parenting decision about our grandson. We have that right. We're his grandparents. We've raised children before, and we know what we're doing. You have the right to leave a child outside in life-threatening temperatures? I asked, my tone curious rather than confrontational. That's what you're saying, that grandparents have the right to do that? We have the right to discipline family members as we see fit, Donald said firmly. What happens within a family is family business, not hospital business, not your business, not anyone else's business. So, you're claiming authority over my son? The right to make decisions about his welfare that supersede my authority as his mother. We're saying we know better than you do how to raise a strong child, Rachel interjected. You're too soft with him, Grace. You always have been. Someone needed to step in. I nodded slowly, as if considering this perspective. My phone was still recording in my pocket, capturing every word of this conversation, every admission of intent, every claim of authority over my child, every justification for what they'd done. I see, I said. So this wasn't an accident. You're saying you deliberately chose to send him outside as discipline. Yes, Patricia said, exasperated. How many times do we have to explain this? And you believe you had the right to make that choice, even though he's my child and I'm his legal guardian? We believe family takes precedence over legal technicalities, Donald said. You're being very American about this, Grace. Very individualistic. That's not how our family works. I filed that away, too. Not just an admission of intentional action, but a rejection of my legal authority over my own child. They were building my case for me, one arrogant statement at a time. Thank you for clarifying, I said, and stood up. The suddenness of my movement seemed to startle them. Patricia half rose from her seat, then settled back uncertainly. Where are you going? She asked. I didn't answer. I simply walked toward the door, my movements unhurried but purposeful. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't issue threats. I didn't warn them what was coming. I just left, Pulling the door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded, even to my own ears, like something final. As I walked to my car, I could see them through the living room window. All three of them standing now, watching me leave with expressions that finally held something like concern. They were beginning to understand that they'd miscalculated, that the Grace they thought they knew had never really existed, or perhaps had simply stopped existing the moment they endangered my son. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel. Then I pulled out my phone and composed an email to Patricia Morrison, the lawyer I'd been quietly consulting for the past 3 months about matters I hadn't yet been ready to act on. Patricia, I typed. I have everything we need. Video evidence, audio recordings, medical documentation. Let's destroy them. I hit send and started the engine. As I was backing out of the driveway, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. Not my phone. Marcus's iPad, which he'd left in my car last week and I hadn't bothered to return. It was synced to his phone and occasionally showed his text notifications before he read them. This notification made me stop the car. Jay, did you tell her yet? I stared at the screen. Jay? Marcus didn't have any close friends whose names started with J. No colleagues, no relatives. My mind went immediately to the only J in both our families. Jessica, my sister. I grabbed the iPad and took a screenshot before the notification could disappear. My hands were steady, my breathing calm, but something cold was spreading through my chest. Did you tell her yet? Tell her what? I looked at the Thompson house one more time, then pulled up Patricia Morrison's email again. Actually, I typed, I think there's more to uncover. Can we meet first thing tomorrow? I need to investigate something about Marcus and my sister. Patricia Morrison's office was on the 14th floor of the Morrison and Green building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. I'd been working in this building for 7 years, but I'd never told either family which building I worked in, let alone which firm. As far as they knew, I was some kind of administrative assistant who spent her days filing paperwork and answering phones. The truth was considerably different. I arrived at Patricia's office at 7 in the morning, an hour before most of the staff would arrive. She was already there, of course. Patricia Morrison didn't become the founding partner of one of the region's most prestigious litigation firms by keeping bankers' hours. She was 62, sharp as a surgical blade, and had been my mentor since I joined the firm as a junior associate 7 years ago. Grace, she said, looking up from her computer as I entered. I got your emails. Both of them. Sit down and tell me everything. I spent the next 40 minutes walking her through every detail. The restaurant incident, Liam's hypothermia, the hidden coat, the security footage, the audio recording of Marcus's family confessing their actions, the credit cards opened in my name. And finally, the mysterious text from someone named Jay asking Marcus if he'd told me yet. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes in her precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. You know what we have here, don't you? She asked. A custody case with strong evidence of child endangerment. More than that, we have criminal child abuse, financial fraud, possibly conspiracy if your suspicions about your sister are correct. She tapped her pen against her notepad. Grace, in the 7 years you've worked for me, I've watched you handle some of the most complex family law cases this firm has ever seen. You've won judgments that other lawyers said were impossible. You've outmaneuvered opposing counsel who had 20 years more experience than you. And do you know what I've always wondered? I waited. I've wondered when you'd finally use those skills for yourself. The words hung in the air between us. Patricia knew. Had always known that my personal life was a disaster. Even as my professional life flourished, she'd seen me come to work with shadows under my eyes. She'd noticed when I started eating lunch at my desk instead of going home. She'd watched me slowly, systematically, prepare for something, even if neither of us had named it out loud. You understand what they don't know about you, right? Patricia continued. What neither family has ever known. I nodded. Slowly. That I'm not who they think I am. You're not an office worker making $40,000 a year. You're a senior litigation associate at one of the most respected law firms in the region, making $185,000 annually. You're the youngest person in this firm's 40-year history to be placed on partner track. You specialize in family law and civil litigation, the exact expertise needed to demolish them in court. And you've been quietly, methodically preparing for this fight for years. It was true. For 5 years, since shortly after Liam was born, I'd been living a double life. At work, I was Grace Thompson, rising star of Morrison and Green, the associate who could dissect a prenuptial agreement blindfolded and find every exploitable weakness in a custody argument. At home and with family, I was Grace, the office worker, the helpful sister, the accommodating wife, the woman who never made waves. I'd kept my career a secret initially because my family's reaction to my law school acceptance had been so discouraging. My mother had called it unnecessarily ambitious. My father had worried about the debt. Jessica had made jokes about me becoming a corporate sellout. And when I met Marcus during my final year of law school, something told me to keep my aspirations vague. His casual comments about career women and ambitious types had set off quiet alarm bells. So, I'd let everyone believe what they wanted to believe. That I did generic office work. That I made a modest salary. That I was ordinary, simple, manageable. Meanwhile, I'd passed the bar exam on my first attempt. I'd won every major case I'd been assigned as a junior associate. I'd made senior associate in 4 years, half the usual time. And 3 years ago, when Marcus's spending habits started raising red flags, I'd opened a separate bank account that neither he nor anyone in my family knew about. I'd been funneling money into it every month, my escape fund. Though I hadn't been ready to name what I was escaping from. The account now held just over $120,000. I started documenting everything 2 years ago, I told Patricia. When I first noticed the credit card charges, that didn't make sense. I have bank statements showing every deposit I made and every withdrawal Marcus made. I have credit card bills for cards I didn't open. I have text messages between Marcus and his family discussing Liam in ways that make it clear they view him as a problem. I have a timeline of incidents where they showed hostility toward him, the time they forgot to pick him up from school, the birthday party they didn't invite him to, the Christmas where they gave every other child gifts but gave him a book about being obedient. Patricia's expression grew harder with each item I listed. You've been building a case without realizing you were building a case. I was just protecting myself, I said. I thought if things ever got bad enough that I needed to leave, I'd have proof that it wasn't my fault. Grace. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes intense. What they did to Liam isn't things getting bad. It's criminal child endangerment. And with the evidence you have, the video, the audio, the medical records, the pattern of hostility, we're not just looking at a custody case. We can file for criminal charges against Marcus's family. The district attorney would likely pursue prosecution. My breath caught. Criminal charges. Child endangerment causing bodily harm, possibly attempted child abuse. The video shows them deliberately putting him in danger. The audio has them admitting intent. The medical records prove actual harm occurred. And your documentation of their pattern of behavior shows this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of ongoing mistreatment. She picked up her phone. I'm calling Martin Chin in the criminal division. He needs to hear this. Wait. I held up my hand. There's one more thing. The text from Jay. I think it's my sister, Jessica. I need to know what Marcus was supposed to tell me before I move forward. If there's something going on between them, then we add it to the case, Patricia said. Adultery isn't criminal, but it's relevant in custody determinations. And if your sister was involved in the financial fraud, if she was a beneficiary of those credit cards Marcus opened in your name, that's conspiracy to commit fraud. She was right. I knew she was right. But I needed to know the full scope of the betrayal before I pulled the trigger on legal action that would be irreversible and devastating. Patricia studied my face, then nodded. Okay, we investigate first. But Grace, we're not waiting long. That child was almost killed. We move on this within the week. She pulled up a file on her computer and turned the screen toward me. This isn't just a custody case anymore. We can file criminal charges. And when we're done, they'll wish they'd never laid eyes on Liam. I left Patricia's office with a plan forming, but I needed to get back to Liam. He was still at my apartment with Mrs. Chin, the elderly neighbor who'd agreed to watch him for a few hours. When I walked through the door, I found them at the kitchen table, Liam carefully coloring in a dinosaur picture, while Mrs. Chin watched with gentle approval. "He's been very good," she said, gathering her things. "Ate all his breakfast. No nightmares this morning." After she left, I settled onto the couch with my laptop to begin documenting everything for Patricia, but my eyes kept drifting to Liam. He'd moved to the living room floor, surrounded by his toy cars, making quiet engine noises as he pushed them across the carpet. He looked so small, so vulnerable, so completely trusting that the world would keep him safe, just like I'd been at his age. The memory hit me with such force that I actually gasped. I'd spent 27 years keeping it locked away in some sealed compartment of my mind, but watching my son play after nearly dying in the cold had broken whatever lock I'd placed on that box. I was 8 years old. We were living in the small house in Vermont where I'd spent my entire childhood. It was January, one of those bitter winter nights where the cold feels alive, predatory. I'd been helping set the table for dinner and accidentally knocked a glass off the counter. It shattered across the kitchen floor in a spectacular explosion of fragments. My father's face had gone dark. "You clumsy, stupid girl. I'm sorry. I'm sorry," I'd stammered, dropping to my knees to pick up the pieces. "Sorry doesn't fix it." He grabbed my arm, pulled me to my feet, and marched me to the back door. "You can stand outside and think about being more careful." "But Daddy, it's cold." "Should have thought of that before you broke my glass." He'd pushed me out the door in just my dress and tights. No coat. No shoes. I heard the lock click. Through the window, I could see my mother setting food on the table. I could see Jessica, only 5 years old then, sitting in her chair with wide eyes. I knocked on the glass. "Mommy, please." My mother glanced at me, then looked away. My father sat down and began eating as if I didn't exist. I'd stood there for I don't know how long. Long enough for my fingers to go numb. Long enough for my lips to lose feeling. Long enough for the shivering to become so violent that I couldn't control my body. I'd eventually stopped knocking and just slid down to sit on the frozen concrete porch, pulling my dress over my knees, trying to make myself as small as possible. I don't remember much after that, but I remember a car pulling into our driveway. I remember a woman's voice, urgent and alarmed. I remember being wrapped in a warm coat that smelled like perfume and coffee. I remember bright lights and warm blankets and a doctor with kind eyes. The woman's name was Margaret Brennan. She was a family law attorney, driving home from a late meeting when she'd seen me on that porch, blue-lipped and barely conscious. She'd taken me to the hospital, called the police, and later sat with me while I gave my statement to a social worker. Before she left that night, she'd crouched down to my eye level and taken my hands in hers. "Sweetheart, I need you to understand something very important. What happened to you tonight was wrong. Your father was wrong. Your mother was wrong. You didn't deserve that, and it wasn't your fault." She'd paused, making sure I was listening. "When you grow up, I want you to learn law. Learn how to protect yourself. Learn how to protect others like you. Can you promise me you'll remember that?" I'd nodded, not really understanding, but knowing somehow that this moment mattered. "You're stronger than you know," she'd said. "Never forget that." I'd seen Margaret several times after that, during the custody proceedings that followed. She'd helped navigate the legal system and made sure I was protected, made sure my voice was heard. And when I was placed with my aunt, Margaret had given me a photograph of the two of us, taken on the courthouse steps. On the back, she'd written, "You're stronger than you know. Use that strength to protect others." I kept in touch with Margaret over the years. She'd been thrilled when I'd gotten into law school, had written me a recommendation letter, had been at my graduation. When she died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I'd felt like I'd lost a second mother, or perhaps the only real mother I'd ever had. I stood up from the couch and walked to my bedroom, opening the bottom drawer of my dresser where I kept things too precious to leave out, but too painful to look at regularly. The photograph was there, protected in a frame. Margaret and 8-year-old me, her arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. On the back, her handwriting still clear after 27 years, "You're stronger than you know. Use that strength to protect others." I traced the words with my finger, then looked back at Liam through the doorway. He was arranging his cars in a careful line, completely absorbed in his play. Safe and warm and protected. The parallel was so obvious, it hurt. My father had locked me outside in the cold. Marcus's family had locked Liam outside in the cold. The cycle was repeating itself, the abuse cascading down through generations, finding new victims in each family. But there was one crucial difference. At 8 years old, I'd been powerless. I'd had to wait for a stranger to save me. Had to depend on Margaret's intervention to escape. At 35, I had power. I had knowledge. I had resources. I had legal expertise and financial independence and documented evidence and every tool necessary to not just stop the abuse, but to ensure it could never happen again. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was petty, reactive, emotional. This was about prevention. This was about breaking a cycle that had already claimed too many victims. This was about making sure Liam never became another Grace, another child who spent decades recovering from the trauma of being disposable to the people who should have protected them. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. It was nearly midnight, but she answered on the second ring. "Grace, I don't want just custody," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I want everything. Full legal protection for Liam. Financial compensation for the fraud. Criminal investigation of everyone involved. I want them to face every possible consequence for what they've done. No mercy. No compromise. No forgiveness." There was a brief pause. Then Patricia's voice came back, firm and approving. "Then that's exactly what we'll give you. Let's make them regret every second they hurt your son." 1 week. That's how long it took Patricia and her team to build an airtight case that would change everything. 7 days of gathering documents, organizing evidence, and preparing filings that would launch what Patricia called the most comprehensive family law offensive I've built in 20 years. I spent those days in a strange state of hyperfocus, working my regular caseload at the firm during business hours, then staying late to work on my own case, with Patricia's guidance. Liam stayed with Mrs. Chen during the days, and I noticed he was sleeping better, eating better, smiling more. The further we got from that night at the restaurant, the more he seemed to relax into the safety of our small apartment. He'd started drawing again, which his therapist said was a good sign. The pictures were all the same, a small house with 2 people inside, sunshine overhead, and bright colors everywhere. On the 7th day, we filed the petition for emergency divorce with full custody. It went to the family court at 9 in the morning. Patricia and I had worked until 3 a.m. the night before, perfecting every word, attaching every piece of evidence. The filing was 63 pages long, not including exhibits. We submitted the restaurant security footage on a thumb drive, with timestamps annotated. We included Liam's complete medical records from the emergency room with the doctor's notes about hypothermia and the explicit statement about how close he'd come to dying. We attached transcripts of the audio recording from Marcus's parents' house, with each admission of intentional action highlighted in yellow. And we included 3 years of financial records proving that Marcus had opened 5 credit cards in my name without my knowledge or consent, accumulating over $26,000 in debt that appeared on my credit report while he used the money for his personal expenses. Each document was a nail, and we were building a coffin. The judge assigned to our case was the Honorable Sarah Chen, a woman with a reputation for taking child endangerment cases seriously. She reviewed our emergency petition that same afternoon. By 5 p.m., we had a ruling, emergency protective order granted. Marcus was prohibited from any unsupervised contact with Liam pending a full hearing. He could have supervised visits of no more than 2 hours per week, with a court-appointed supervisor present at all times and all costs paid by Marcus. His parents, Donald and Patricia Thompson, and his sister, Rachel Thompson, were barred from any contact with Liam whatsoever. No visits. No phone calls. No letters. No social media contact. Violation of this order would result in immediate arrest. Patricia called me with the news while I was making dinner for Liam. "Grace, we got everything we asked for." Judge Chen called the evidence deeply disturbing in her written order. "She's fast-tracking the preliminary hearing." We're on the docket for 6 weeks from now. I'd expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired and determined. This was only the beginning. The court automatically forwarded our evidence to Child Protective Services, as they were required to do in cases involving documented child endangerment. Within 2 days, a CPS investigator named Monica Rodriguez contacted me to schedule an interview. She came to my apartment on a Thursday afternoon, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a notepad that she filled with careful observations. She interviewed me for 2 hours, then spent an hour talking to Liam in a way that seemed more like play than interrogation. When she finished, she sat across from me at my kitchen table and spoke with a frankness I appreciated. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been doing this job for 16 years. I've seen a lot of child abuse and neglect cases. What happened to your son ranks in the top 10% of severity we encounter." She flipped through her notes. The deliberate exposure to life-threatening cold. The filmed evidence showing multiple adults actively ignoring his distress. The hidden coat proving premeditation. This isn't a case of poor judgment or momentary neglect. This is calculated endangerment of a child. "What happens now?" I asked. "I'm opening a formal investigation into the Thompson family. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, and your documentation suggests we can, I'll be recommending that Donald and Patricia Thompson be placed on the state's child abuse registry. That would prohibit them from having unsupervised contact with any minor, including future grandchildren, and would flag them in background check systems." The weight of that statement settled over me. Marcus's parents banned from being around children. It seemed both too severe and not severe enough. Could there be criminal charges? I asked. Monica met my eyes directly. "The district attorney's office will review my report. Given the video evidence and the severity of harm, I believe they'll pursue prosecution for child endangerment causing bodily harm." That's a felony in this state. While CPS was investigating, the financial consequences were beginning to hit Marcus. The bank had frozen his access to our joint accounts pending their fraud investigation. The credit card companies had flagged all 5 fraudulent accounts and were treating me as a victim of spousal financial abuse rather than a co-borrower. They'd removed the debt from my credit report and transferred it entirely to Marcus's name. More significantly, he'd received official notification that he was under investigation for identity theft and fraudulent use of credit, both of which carried criminal penalties in addition to civil liability. He could face not just financial ruin, but actual prison time. I learned all of this from Patricia, who was in contact with the bank's legal department and the credit card fraud divisions. But I heard it firsthand when Marcus showed up at my apartment at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. I was reading in bed, Liam asleep in the bedroom, when I heard the pounding on my door. "Grace, open this door right now." Marcus's voice was loud enough to wake neighbors. "We need to talk about this. You can't just destroy my life like this." I didn't move. I just picked up my phone and opened the recording app, then called out, "Marcus, there's a protective order. You're not supposed to be here." "I don't care about the order. Open up. We need to talk about this now." I heard Mrs. Chen's door open down the hall. Other neighbors were probably being disturbed, too. The last thing I needed was for Marcus to create a scene that would bring police who might not understand the full context of our situation. So, I made a decision. I walked to the door and opened it, phone in hand with the recording already running. Marcus pushed past me immediately, not waiting for an invitation. He was disheveled in a way I'd never seen him, his shirt untucked, his hair uncombed, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. He spun around in my small living room, his hands gesturing wildly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea how you've destroyed everything?" "Keep your voice down," I said quietly. "Liam is sleeping." "Of course he is. Of course you're worried about poor little Liam. That's all you ever care about." He was pacing now, his movements jerky and aggressive. "Meanwhile, I've lost access to my accounts." "My accounts, Grace?" "Money I earned." "Money you earned?" I kept my voice level, almost curious. "Walk me through that math, Marcus." Because from where I'm standing, I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the childcare, the groceries, and everything else while you contributed sporadically at best. "We're married." What's yours is mine. That's how marriage works. You make money, we spend money. I shouldn't have to ask permission to use what's rightfully ours. The entitlement in his voice was staggering. He genuinely believed it. Marriage, in his mind, had given him ownership rights to everything I earned while maintaining exclusive control over anything he contributed. His logic was so warped, so fundamentally selfish, that I found myself momentarily speechless. So you opened credit cards in my name because you believed you had a right to my credit? I needed the money. You're so tight with every dollar, constantly questioning every purchase I make, acting like I have to justify wanting to live a decent life. The credit cards were supposed to be temporary, just until I got the promotion I've been waiting for. But instead of supporting me like a wife should, you go nuclear and file for divorce, freeze the accounts, make me look like some kind of criminal. You committed identity theft, Marcus. That is criminal. It's not theft when we're married. God, you're so literal about everything. Always have been. Everything has to be by the book with you, doesn't it? No flexibility, no understanding, just rules and judgments. And that look on your face like you're better than everyone else. I let him talk. Every word was evidence. Every admission was another nail. And now you've turned this whole thing with Liam into some kind of drama. He was outside for what, an hour? Kids used to play outside in the cold all the time. But no, you have to rush him to the emergency room, get CPS involved, act like we tried to kill him. It's ridiculous, Grace. You're being ridiculous. 2 hours, I said quietly. He was outside for 2 hours in 5-degree weather. And the doctor said 20 more minutes would have killed him. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. Doctors exaggerate. They have to cover themselves legally. He was fine. He is fine. But you've taken this minor incident and weaponized it to destroy my relationship with my son, to destroy my reputation, to destroy my family. Your family locked him outside deliberately, Marcus. They hid his coat under the car seat because he needed to learn. He was acting out, embarrassing us in the restaurant. My parents were trying to teach him discipline, something you've completely failed to do. You coddle him constantly, Grace. You baby him. That's why he's so soft. Why he cries over everything. Why he can't handle the smallest bit of adversity. He's weak because you've made him weak. Something cold settled in my chest. You think your 5-year-old son is weak? I think he needs to toughen up. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me directly, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before, or perhaps had seen but refused to acknowledge. Pure contempt. Honestly, I never wanted to be a father, you know that. You talked me into it. Said it would be good for us, that it would make our marriage stronger. But all it did was make everything harder. The crying, the demands, the constant needs. I wanted a life, Grace. I wanted to travel, to go out with friends, to have freedom. Instead, I got a kid who needs something every 5 minutes and a wife who judges me for not being thrilled about it. You never wanted to be a father? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. No, I didn't. Is that so terrible? Not everyone wants kids, but you made me feel like I'm a monster for having doubts. So, I went along with it. And now I'm stuck with this responsibility I never signed up for. And the truth is, I was hoping he'd learn to handle things himself, learn not to be so dependent, so needy, so constantly demanding attention. That's why I didn't object when my parents wanted to discipline him. I thought maybe they could teach him what you couldn't, how to be self-reliant. There it was. The admission that would end him legally. He'd just confessed to willfully neglecting his son, to viewing Liam not as a child deserving protection, but as an inconvenience he wished would disappear. He'd admitted that the restaurant incident wasn't a mistake, but an extension of his deliberate emotional abandonment. Marcus seemed to realize he'd said something significant because he stopped talking abruptly. The silence stretched between us. I held up my phone, screen facing him, showing the recording app with its elapsed time, 14 minutes and 37 seconds. The color drained from his face. What did you, every word, I said quietly. Your statement that you never wanted to be a father. Your admission that you hoped Liam would learn to handle things himself instead of receiving proper care. Your confession that you intentionally allowed your parents to endanger him as a form of discipline you approved of. All recorded. All documented. All admissible in family court. You can't. That's entrapment. It's not. I'm in my own home. You came here in violation of a protective order. I told you at the start. I knew you were here. You chose to speak anyway. This is completely legal evidence that you just handed me. I moved toward the door and opened it. This conversation is over. My lawyer will be in touch. I suggest you get your own legal representation immediately because what you just said is going to cost you everything. He stood there frozen, his face cycling through emotions, shock, rage, fear, and finally, something that looked almost like comprehension. Grace, I didn't mean yes, you did. You meant every word. Now leave. He walked past me, and I closed the door behind him, engaging both locks. Then I stood there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, before I pulled up Patricia's contact and sent her the audio file. The subject line read, "Add this to the evidence." He just destroyed himself. Patricia called me at 7 the next morning, which meant she'd listened to Marcus's recording immediately, despite the late hour I'd sent it. Grace, this is extraordinary. His admission about never wanting to be a father, about hoping Liam would handle things himself. This is direct evidence of willful neglect. Combined with everything else, we don't just have a custody case anymore. We have grounds for termination of parental rights if you want to pursue it. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise through my window. What I want is to make sure he can never hurt Liam again. What's the best strategic approach? Let me show you what I've been working on. Can you come to the office at 10 o'clock? 3 hours later, I sat in Patricia's conference room while she walked me through what she called the most comprehensive family law offensive I've built in 20 years. She'd brought in 2 other attorneys from the firm, David Chin, who specialized in civil fraud litigation, and Maria Gonzalez, who had connections at the district attorney's office. Patricia stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, drawing 3 columns. "We're not playing defense anymore," she said. "We're launching a coordinated 3-front assault. Here's how it works." She wrote family court in the first column. Front number 1. Divorce with full custody and substantial child support. We're seeking primary physical and legal custody of Liam, with Marcus receiving only supervised visitation. We're also seeking child support based on his previous income, plus reimbursement for all childcare and medical expenses you've paid. The restaurant incident, combined with his recorded confession, makes this nearly unlosable. In the second column, she wrote civil court. Front number 2, we file a civil lawsuit against Marcus for financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're seeking recovery of the $26,000 in fraudulent credit card debt, plus damages, plus attorney's fees. This is a separate case from the divorce, which means even if he tries to hide assets during the divorce proceedings, we have another mechanism to pursue collection. In the third column, criminal front. Number 3, we cooperate fully with the district attorney's investigation into child endangerment and with federal authorities regarding identity theft and tax fraud. We're not filing criminal charges ourselves, we can't, that's the DA's job. But we're providing every piece of evidence to make prosecution inevitable. She drew arrows between the 3 columns. Here's why this works. Each front reinforces the others. When Marcus has to defend himself in family court, he's distracted and financially drained, making him vulnerable in civil court. When he's dealing with criminal investigations, his attention is divided and his legal resources are depleted. We're not giving him room to breathe. While he's defending on one front, another attack hits him from behind. This is how you dismantle people who think they're untouchable. David Chin pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. Grace, when we were reviewing the financial evidence you provided, we noticed something interesting in Marcus's tax returns. He's been claiming substantial deductions for childcare expenses. I paid all the childcare expenses, I said. I have receipts for every payment. Exactly. Which means Marcus fraudulently claimed deductions for expenses he didn't pay, reducing his tax liability by approximately $11,000 per year over 3 years. That's $33,000 in tax fraud. The number hit me like a physical blow. He's been stealing from the IRS while simultaneously stealing from you, David confirmed. It shows a pattern of financial fraud that goes beyond marital misconduct into federal criminal territory. The IRS takes this very seriously, especially when someone is deliberately falsifying deductions. Maria leaned forward. I spoke with Assistant District Attorney William Park yesterday. He's very interested in prosecuting the child endangerment case, especially with the video evidence and Marcus's recorded confession. But the tax fraud angle makes this even more compelling. Federal prosecutors love cases with multiple jurisdictions involved because it shows a pattern of criminal behavior rather than a single bad decision. What happens now? I asked. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Now we execute. Today, we file the civil fraud lawsuit. Tomorrow, David delivers a comprehensive report to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Next week, Maria facilitates a meeting between you and the DA. Over the next several days, I provided everything the legal team requested. Bank statements going back 5 years. Every receipt I'd saved for childcare, medical expenses, school supplies. Canceled checks showing mortgage payments, utility payments, grocery expenses. Credit card statements, both the legitimate ones I'd opened and the fraudulent ones Marcus had opened in my name. Tax returns for our entire marriage, with my own documentation showing which expenses I'd actually paid. Patricia's team was impressed by my organization. Most clients have to scramble to find documents, David told me. You have everything cross-referenced and chronologically organized. It's like you've been preparing for this case for years. 2 years, I said. I've been documenting everything for 2 years. Because I had been. Since the first time I'd noticed suspicious charges on our account. Some part of me had known I might need evidence someday. I'd been building a case without consciously admitting I was building a case, saving every receipt, photographing every document, creating a paper trail that would prove every claim I might eventually need to make. Meanwhile, Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of what he was facing. His lawyer had undoubtedly explained that he wasn't dealing with one manageable problem, but multiple cascading crises. Each time he thought he had one fire under control, another ignited behind him. I heard through Patricia that he'd tried to hire a high-powered defense attorney, only to be told that his case was too complex and too likely to end in conviction to be worth the firm's reputation risk. He'd burned through 3 lawyers in 2 weeks, each one realizing that there was no good defense for video evidence of child endangerment combined with recorded confessions of neglect and documented financial fraud. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus received a certified letter from the Internal Revenue Service. I didn't see it, but Patricia had a contact in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division who confirmed the contents. Official audit notification for tax years 2021, 2022, and 2023, with specific focus on fraudulent childcare expense deductions. The letter explicitly stated that the matter had been referred to IRS Criminal Investigation for potential prosecution. Total alleged tax fraud, $34,200. Potential penalty, up to 3 years in federal prison per count. Patricia called me with the news. Grace, he just received the audit notification. According to my source, he turned white, sat down on his front steps, and didn't move for 20 minutes. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a cold, clear certainty that justice was finally catching up to someone who'd spent years believing he was too smart, too entitled, too protected to ever face consequences for his actions. What happens next? I asked. Now he realizes he can't win, and desperate people make mistakes. For days after Marcus received his IRS audit notification, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there with Jessica beside her. Both of them wearing expressions that I'd learned to recognize over 35 years. They needed something from me. Nice place, Jessica said, in a tone that made clear she thought it was anything but nice. Very cozy. I closed the door and leaned against it. Not offering them seats. Not offering refreshments. Not offering the automatic hospitality that had been trained into me since childhood. What do you need? My mother looked startled by my directness, but recovered quickly. Can't a mother visit her daughter? We've been worried about you with everything going on. Everything going on? I repeated. You mean the fact that Marcus's family nearly killed your grandson? That everything going on. Well, I'm sure it wasn't as serious as all that, my mother said, waving a dismissive hand. Children are resilient, but Grace, that's not why we're here. We have something much more important to discuss. Jessica's boutique is facing some financial difficulties. And where's Liam? Jessica interrupted, looking around. Is he here? He's at his friend's house for a play date. And no, you can't see him. There's a custody battle happening, and I'm limiting his exposure to anyone who might be called as a witness. This was partially true. Liam was indeed at a friend's house, but the real reason I didn't want them near him was simpler. They'd never cared about his well-being before, and I wasn't about to let them use him now. As I was saying, my mother continued, clearly eager to move past the topic of her grandson. Jessica's business needs some financial support to get through a temporary rough patch. We were hoping you could help by taking out a home equity loan. I rent, I said. I don't own a home. Oh. My mother looked genuinely surprised, as if she'd never bothered to learn basic facts about my life. Well, perhaps a personal loan then, or you could co-sign. Why can't Jessica get her own loan? I asked, looking at my sister. Why do you need me to co-sign? Jessica's expression tightened. My credit situation is complicated right now. Complicated how? That's not really your concern, my mother interjected. The point is, family helps family. Your sister needs support, and you're in a position to provide it. I'm in the middle of a divorce and a custody battle. I'm dealing with credit card fraud and IRS investigations. I have a 5-year-old son who's recovering from trauma. And you think this is the time to ask me for money? Your sister's business is at stake. My mother's voice rose. This is her livelihood, her dream. Surely you can put aside your personal problems to help family. Personal problems. That's what she called my son nearly dying and my husband committing multiple federal crimes. Personal problems. Jessica's phone rang, breaking the tension. She glanced at the screen and silenced it quickly, but not before I saw the name flash. Marcus. My entire body went cold. Why is Marcus calling you? I asked quietly. What? He's not. That wasn't. Jessica fumbled with her phone, her face flushing. It was someone else. You misread it. But I hadn't misread it, and the panic in her eyes told me everything I needed to know about whether I was imagining things. My mother's phone buzzed. Then she pulled it from her purse, looked at the screen, and her face did something complicated. She quickly declined the call and shoved the phone back in her purse, but I'd seen it. The caller ID had read Marcus. Why? I asked very carefully. Is my husband calling both of you? I'm sure it's just about the custody situation, my mother said too quickly. He's probably trying to reach you through us, since you won't talk to him directly. He has my number. He has my lawyer's number. He doesn't need to go through my family. Unless there's another reason he'd be calling you. The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. You know what? I said. Let me see Jessica's financial records. If I'm going to consider any kind of loan or co-signing, I need to understand the actual situation. Jessica hesitated, then pulled a folder from her bag. Fine, but you'll see it's just temporary cash flow issues. The business itself is sound. I took the folder and started flipping through papers. Bank statements showing declining balances, vendor invoices marked overdue, credit card statements with balances in the thousands. And then, wedged between 2 pages, a hotel receipt. The Grandview Hotel, room 447, date September 15th to 17th. Total $847.52. For 2 nights. I knew that date. Marcus had been at a work conference that weekend in Chicago, he'd said. The Grandview Hotel was in the city where my mother and Jessica lived, 3 hours away from Chicago. What's this? I asked, holding up the receipt. Jessica's face went white. I had to meet with a potential investor. The hotel has nice conference facilities. An investor who required a 2-night stay at an expensive hotel? It was a complex negotiation. Look, if you're going to interrogate me about every expense, maybe we should just forget the whole thing. Maybe we should, I agreed. My mother stood up. Grace, you're being unreasonable. We came here asking for family support and you're treating us like criminals. I'll think about it, I said, which we all knew meant no. Let me review these documents more carefully. After they left, I sat with Jessica's financial records spread across my kitchen table. The hotel receipt stared up at me. Same city, same weekend, same time Marcus was supposedly at a conference. I pulled out my phone and called a number I'd been given by one of Patricia's colleagues, Robert Chun, private investigator. Mr. Chin, this is Grace Thompson. I need to hire you for a discreet investigation. I believe my husband may be having an affair with my sister, and I need proof. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my bank, speaking with the manager who'd been helping me untangle Marcus's financial fraud. Mr. Williams, I need Marcus's complete transaction history for the past 3 years. Every transfer, every payment, everything. He typed into his computer. Then his expression changed. Mrs. Thompson, there are a lot of transfers to the same account. Dozens of them, actually, going back about 2 years. My hands tightened on the armrests of my chair. Can you tell me whose account? He clicked a few more times, then looked up at me with something like pity in his eyes. The account is registered to Jessica Torres. The transfers to Jessica's account totaled $47,000 over 2 years. Regular payments, some monthly, some sporadic, all disguised in Marcus's ledger as business expenses or consulting fees. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't a one-time loan between family members. This was systematic financial support that Marcus had been hiding from me while simultaneously draining my credit through fraudulent cards. I was still processing this information when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Thompson, this is Sandra Kim from First National Bank's Fraud Division. We've been reviewing some applications that were flagged by our system, and we need to speak with you about a loan that was opened in your name 3 weeks ago. My stomach dropped. I haven't applied for any loans. That's what we suspected. The loan is for $68,000, approved for business investment purposes. The application includes your name, social security number, and employment information, but several red flags appeared during our standard review. The signature doesn't match our records, and the stated income is substantially different from what we have on file. Send me everything, I said. I need to see the application, the signature, all of it. The documents arrived in my email within 20 minutes. I opened them on my laptop, and what I saw made my hands shake with rage. Someone had forged my signature with disturbing accuracy. Not perfect. A forensic document examiner would spot the differences, but close enough to pass a casual inspection. The income verification showed I supposedly made $45,000 annually, far below my actual salary, probably to keep the loan amount within believable limits. The stated purpose was small business investment, and the funds had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. But I recognized the handwriting on the supplementary documents. I'd seen it on birthday cards and Christmas notes for 32 years. Jessica's handwriting. My legal training kicked in automatically. This wasn't just family dysfunction or financial irresponsibility. This was identity theft, a federal crime that carried serious penalties. Jessica had committed fraud against a financial institution, forged my signature on legal documents, and stolen my identity too. Obtained money she had no right to access. And my mother, based on her evasiveness earlier, almost certainly knew about it. I called Jessica. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. Grace, did you think about the loan? Come to my apartment now. Bring Mom. We need to talk. I'm actually busy right now, Jessica, or I make one phone call to the police, and you can explain this at the station instead. 30 minutes later, they were back at my door. Jessica's earlier confidence had evaporated. My mother looked defiant, but I could see uncertainty underneath. I didn't invite them to sit. I just placed the printed loan documents on my kitchen counter and waited. Jessica looked at them and her face crumpled. Grace, I can explain, you forged my signature on a loan application for $68,000. I was going to pay it back. It was just temporary, just to keep the boutique afloat until you committed identity theft. You defrauded a bank. You stole my identity to obtain money you knew I wouldn't give you willingly. My mother stepped between us. Grace, don't be so dramatic. This is family. Jessica made a mistake, yes, but she had good intentions. She was trying to save her business, provide for her future. Surely you can understand. Understand. I turned to my mother. Did you know about this? The pause before she answered told me everything. I knew Jessica was exploring options, but I didn't know the specifics. And honestly, Grace, family helps family in difficult times. You should understand that. Family helps family? I repeated. That's always your answer, isn't it? But it's only ever directed at me. Jessica needed money, so Grace should provide it. Jessica committed a federal crime, so Grace should forgive it. Jessica destroyed my credit and my financial security, so Grace should understand. I picked up my phone. No, not anymore. My mother's eyes widened. What are you doing? Calling the police? You wouldn't. My mother's voice rose. You wouldn't report your own sister to the police. Grace, think about what you're doing. Think about the family. I am thinking about family. My family. Liam and me. And we're done being the people you exploit every time you need something. Jessica started crying in earnest now. Grace, please. I'm sorry. I'll find a way to pay it back. I'll fix this. Just please don't, the 911 operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report identity theft, I said, looking directly at my sister. My sister forged my signature on a loan application and fraudulently obtained $68,000 in my name. Jessica let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. My mother grabbed for my phone, but I stepped away. Ma'am, can you provide your information? The operator asked. I gave my name, address, and explained the situation while my mother and sister stood frozen in my kitchen. The operator told me an officer would be at my apartment within 30 minutes to take a full statement. When I hung up, my mother's face had gone from outraged to genuinely frightened. Grace, you've just destroyed your sister's life over money. Is that really the kind of person you want to be? The kind of person who stops enabling criminals? I opened my apartment door. Yes, that's exactly who I want to be. What would you have done if your own family turned against you like this? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and maintaining a toxic facade? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.